Hi Flashes, today we are going to be working on more Pythagorean theorem word problems. So let's look at the first one. To get from point A to point B, you must avoid walking through a pond. To avoid the pond, you must walk 34 meters south and 41 meters east. To the nearest meter, how many meters would be saved if it were possible to walk through the pond? So as you guys can see, they already drew our picture here. So it was 41 miles east and 34 meters south, and we just need to find this number. So remember, when you see your right angle and you're trying to find the side opposite of that right angle, you are trying to find the hypotenuse, which is your C value. Okay, so let's go ahead and write our formula. So it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and I just need to start plugging in my numbers. So again, your legs, it does not matter if you plug it in for A or B. So let's say I plug in 34 for A and 41 for B. Okay, so now we're just going to solve it. So if you use your calculator, 34 squared will give us 1,156. 41 squared will give us 1,681. And all that is still going to equal your C squared. So we still need to simplify this equation one more time by adding 1156 plus 1681, and that will give us 2,837. So this is not my answer because I still need to get C by itself. So remember, to get rid of a squared sign, you do its opposite, which is square rooting. And whatever you do to one side, you must do it to the other side. So when you guys take the square root of 2,837, you get 53 meters. Now, one thing that is tricky about this question is that the 53 meters is not our answer. That is just talking about the distance if you were to walk through the pond. The question, though, is asking how many meters would be saved if it were possible to walk through the pond. So what they're saying is, instead of going 34 meters and then 41 meters, so if I were to add those two together, 34 plus 41, that would give us 75 meters. They're wanting to know, instead of traveling 75 meters, if you were to walk through the pond, how much would you save? So in this case, we're just going to take our 75 meters, subtract it from the meters it would take to walk through the pond, and this will tell us how many meters we would save. So 75 minus 53 meters would give us 22 meters. So 22 meters would be our answer here. Okay. All right, next one. A baseball diamond is a square with sides of 90 feet. What's the shortest distance to the nearest tenth of a foot between first base and third base? So here is my baseball diamond. Okay, and these are all right angles here. And they're wanting to know, so if this is home plate, they're wanting to know the distance from, excuse me, first base to third base. So they're wanting to know this distance right here. And what they tell us is that every side is 90 feet. Okay? So what I tell my students when they're looking at this baseball diamond is, remember, we only need one right triangle. So let's say I were to take out the top part here and I were to just leave the bottom triangle here. So this would be my right angle and these would be 90, and we're trying to find the distance from first to third. Okay, and if you were to turn this picture a little bit, notice how my right angle is right here, and that means that my legs would be 90 and 90, and I'm trying to find the hypotenuse. Okay, so if we're trying to find the hypotenuse, all that we're doing is we're taking a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to plug in my legs in for a and b, so this will be 90 and 90. and I'm trying to solve the hypotenuse, so I'm trying to solve for C. Okay? So first thing we do is simplify. So 90 squared is 8100. And then you have to simplify it one more time by adding your 8100s together. So 8100 plus 8100 is 16,200, and all of that would equal C squared. Okay? And then don't forget, you still have to get C by itself, so you need to get rid of that squared by square rooting. So the square root of 16,200 rounded to the nearest tenth, because they tell you to round to the nearest tenth, would be 127.3 feet. So that's the distance from first to third. All right, next one. A suitcase measures 24 inches long and 18 inches high. What is the diagonal length? And they tell us to round to the nearest tenth of a foot. Okay, so they have a picture here, but I'm going to draw a separate picture because that one's kind of hard to see. So here's my suitcase. And they are saying that it's 24 inches long. So 24 inches long is the bottom number down here. And it is 18 inches high, which means that it's 18 inches tall. And they want us to find the diagonal length. So if we're trying to find the diagonal length, this is going to represent, once again, our hypotenuse. Okay, so this time we're trying to find C. All right, so same thing. If you're trying to find the hypotenuse, you need your formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Your legs are attached to your right angle. It does not matter which one you plug in for A and which one you plug in for B. So let's say I plug in 18 for A and 24 for B. And then you can just start solving this. So first thing we got to do is simplify. So if I were to take 18 squared, that gives me 324. 24 squared gives me 576. And all of that equals C squared. So I still need to simplify by adding these two numbers together, and that would give me 900. And then our last step to get C by itself is the opposite of squaring a number, which is square rooting. So if we were to take the square root of 900, we would get, let me get my calculator. We would get 30. So the square root of 900 is 30. Now again, you have to pay attention to detail, okay? And this is why we make you guys label, because this 30 is talking about inches. So it would be 30 inches. And the reason why this is not my answer is because it's asking for the nearest tenth of a foot. We are in inches right now. So we need to change inches to feet. So if you guys remember conversions, there are 12 inches in 1 foot. So if I want to change inches to feet, I am going to have to divide this 30 by 12 to get it into my feet. So if there's 12 inches in a foot, I'm just going to take 30 divided by 12, and this would give me 2.5 rounded to the nearest tenth feet. So that would be my answer. Again, word problems can be difficult because they try to throw tricks at you, but that's why you just got to pay attention to detail. You have to read it all the way through and make sure that you reread it to see if your answer makes sense. Okay? All right, moving on to the back side. So number 4 says, if a computer catalog, a computer monitor is listed as being 19 inches, this distance is the diagonal distance across the screen. If the screen measures 10 inches in height, what is the actual width of the screen to the nearest inch? So here's my computer screen. They are saying that the 19 inches is representing the diagonal distance. and the 10 inches is talking about its height. So what we are trying to find now, if this is my right angle, we are now trying to find a leg. So I'm just going to label it as B. Okay. So if you're trying to find a leg, this is a little different compared to what we've been doing with finding the hypotenuse. So let's remember. So always start with your formula. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And make sure that you plug in your numbers in the right spot. So since 10 is a leg, I'm going to plug it in for a or b. Since I'm trying to find the other leg, I'm going to leave that as a variable. And then since 19 is our hypotenuse, because it's opposite of that right angle, your hypotenuse is always your c. Okay, now you just solve this like a basic equation. So simplify first. So 10 squared is 100. And 19 squared is 361. So if we want to get b by itself, what we're going to have to do is we need to move this 100 over here first. So since this 100 is a positive, the opposite of a positive is a negative, so I'm going to subtract 100 from both sides of my equal sign by showing proper algebraic steps, and we will be left with b squared equals 261. Alright, so now this is very similar to what we have been doing. To get a variable by itself, you have to use its inverse operation. So since it's being squared, the inverse operation of squaring something is square rooting. So then the square root of 261 would give us 16 inches. Alright, moving on to the next one. The older floppy disc measured 5 1/4 inches on each side. What was the diagonal length of the disc to the nearest 1/10 of an inch? Okay, so they have a picture here. So it measured 5 1/4 inches on each side, so it is a square, and they're wanting to know what's the diagonal. So this one's very similar to the baseball question that we did on the front side. So if all of the sides are 5 1/4 inches, and here's our right angle, that just means that we're trying to find the hypotenuse. Okay, so let's start with our formula. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to plug in my legs in for a and b. So this would be 5 1/4 squared plus 5 1/4 squared equals c squared. And there's a couple different ways that you guys can plug this into your calculator. One way is if you have a fraction button like mine that you can plug in a mixed number, you can do it this way, and then you can square this whole thing. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to change the 1/4 into a decimal. So 1/4 as a decimal is 5.25, and you can square that. So there are a couple different ways that you can do this. So if we were to square that, we would get roughly about 27.5625. So I'm going to change that back to a fraction. So this would be 441 over 16, which as a mixed number would be 27 9/16. Which you are more than welcome to put it as a decimal or leave it as this fraction. I just do better with mixed numbers. So then if we're still trying to get c by itself, I need to next add these together. So I'm going to add 27 9/16 plus 27 9/16, and that will give me 55 1/8. And then my last step to get c by itself is to square root on both sides to get rid of that squared. So my c, if I were to take the square root of 55 1/8, would give me 7.4 inches. Alright, so there's 2 more problems left. So I want you guys to pause this video and go ahead and try out the next 2 problems for me to see if you guys understand the lesson or not. So go ahead and pause the video and try the next two problems. Alright, so you guys should be done with the next two, so let's see how you guys did. So Miss Spires tells you that a right triangle has a hypotenuse of 13. So here's my right triangle. Your hypotenuse is opposite of that right angle, so this would be 13. And one of your legs is 5. And she wants you to find the other leg. So if we're trying to find the other leg, it's going to be represented by A or B. And you guys just had to solve it. So start with your formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Start plugging in your numbers for a and b. So I'm going to leave a alone. I'm going to plug in my 5, my other leg, in for b. And then I'm going to plug in my hypotenuse in for c. And then now we can start solving it by simplifying. So I'm going to leave a squared alone for now. 5 squared is 25. And 13 squared is 169. Now that everything is simplified, I need to get a squared by itself, so I need to move this 25 by subtracting 25. And we get a squared equals 144. And then your last step to get a by itself is to square root. So you guys should have gotten 12. And there's no unit, so you can just leave it as 12. Okay, so good job if you guys got that. If you didn't, make sure you fix your work and understand where your mistake was so that hopefully you don't do it again. And moving on to the last question. So two joggers run 8 miles north and then 5 miles west. What's the shortest distance to the nearest tenth of a mile? And they must travel to return to their starting point. So if they start, I just like to pick a random point. So if they start here and they travel 8 miles north, notice that our compass goes north, east, south, west. A lot of people say never eat soggy waffles. Okay, so if they're traveling north, that means that they're going up. So that means that they would travel 8 miles north, which means they are now here. And then it says that they travel 5 miles west. So going west is to the left. So now they're traveling this way, which was 5. And they're wanting to know is if they are now here, what's the distance from here to where they started at? And this would give us the shortest distance. Okay, so if you notice, this is where our right angle was created, which means that if we're trying to find this diagonal, that is going to be our hypotenuse. Okay, so this was your picture, and we can go ahead and solve for the hypotenuse by our formula, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to plug in my legs in for a and b, and then I'm going to solve for c. So first thing you should have done was simplified. Then you should have added 25 plus 64, which gives you 89. And then last step is to square root to get c by itself. And they did say to round to the nearest tenth. So the square root of 89 would give me 9.4 miles. And that is it. So good job if you guys got that. Please let your teacher know if you have any questions.